If you're sending people to a landing page that's not built to convert, if it doesn't have the social proof that gives somebody the trust in your product or your service, you may be able to get folks to your site, but they're not ultimately going to purchase for you. And that's just one other component. Something else we see all the time is email flows. So making sure that you have automated welcome flows that if they don't purchase the first time they're on your site, they have a lower value touch point, whether it be, downloading a free lead magnet or something like that, that brings them into your ecosystem and allows you to start nurturing the relationship over time. Those are two things that we see all the time: landing pages and email flows that are fundamentals that get overlooked. And people say, hey, the ads aren't working. I got to, try more creative. I got to keep tweaking. I got to change, the different structure that some YouTube guru told me that I need to be running. When in reality, it's like, no, there's some key fundamentals that you've got to get right about your business first. And getting those things right is going to have 100 times more impact than tweaking little bits of the creative here and there.
So many B2B companies and their marketing teams waste money on marketing that doesn't match their business goals. They go up against much larger competitors while also having to contend with limited budgets, resources, and bandwidth. So how can smaller B2B brands outsmart their biggest counterparts and win? Welcome to this episode of the B2B Marketers on a Mission podcast, and I'm your host, Christian Klepp. Today, I'll be talking to Andy Janaitis, who will be answering this question. He's the founder and chief strategist of PPC Pitbulls, a boutique digital marketing agency that helps B2B businesses grow past 7 figures through leveraging Google and Meta ads. Tune in to find out more about what this B2B marketer's mission is. All right, and off we go. Mr. Andy Janaitis, welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me, Christian.
Really enjoyed our pre-interview conversation, Andy. We talked about a lot of things that ranged from B2B marketing to family and hobbies and the different cities that we're living in and what have you. But I am really looking forward to this conversation because it's something that I think a lot of people in the B2B marketing world can relate to. And if they can't relate, they should. All right. So let's dive right in because I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. Right?
Definitely.
Okay. So Andy, you're on a mission to help scale independent B2B brands with data-driven Google and Meta ads. But for this conversation, I'd like to zero in on the topic of how smaller B2B brands can outsmart the bigger competitors by being strategic with PPC. If we're going to use military terms, it almost sounds like you have to learn how to use guerrilla warfare instead of conventional war tactics, right? So I'm going to kick off the conversation with 2 questions, and I'm happy to repeat them, all right? So the first question is, what is it about PPC or pay-per-click that you wish more people understood? And the second question is, why do you think small brands fail when they try to copy big brand ad strategies?
There's a lot there to unpack. And I think, I think you touched on it there, but there's a lot of anxiety among small brands. We work with founders and marketing directors of these independent brands. And oftentimes there's a fear of a Google ads or a Meta ads because they say, hey, there's some big competitors out there in my space that are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. And if I've got my little budget, if I'm trying to spend $5,000 or $10,000 a month, how do I have any chance of competing with them? Surely they're going to outbid me on every single keyword, every single ad placement that I could be in. And what gets missed there is that you actually do have a big advantage in that being smaller, your product probably has a smaller niche than you think, because you're not distributed to everybody. You're speaking to a smaller audience, which allows you to be much more targeted in your messaging. So in that way, where you might have some of these bigger brands that are, of course, way out investing you, that investment is being spread across so many different audiences and so many different placements, whereas you have the ability to say, hey, I've got a limited budget. Let me only target, the most likely people to purchase from me and the people who are, who I'm most likely to resonate with, and then give them a message that really speaks directly to them. So I think that's the first and foremost thing to remember is that you can take this, supposed disadvantage and really turn it into an advantage when you focus in on, who is your smallest, tightest, ideal client that you can target and speak to. I think that's really, really important and gets missed. And to your second question around, the big brand tactics, I think a lot of times people see these Instagram reels, LinkedIn posts that come up with a lot of different strategies that could work well, but are only going to work well on those larger budgets. So one great example of this, a lot of times I see people talking about creative testing and talking about needing, we tested across 100 different assets. We talk about, let's use AI so that we have the model in this particular influencer ad, we can change the hair color and the shirt color and all these different combinations and test all these different things. The problem with that is if you try that with a much smaller budget, you're necessarily going to split, the budget that many different ways. So say you run 100 different combinations, 100 different messages, targets, you're splitting your budget that many different ways, and you're not building up enough data about any one of those individual combinations to make a good decision. So I always kind of tell people, focus on the fundamentals first. Worry about your top level messaging. What is it that really matters most and makes your product different, and your really key differentiators to your most ideal audience. Forget about button colors or with these smaller budgets, don't worry about testing what's the color of the shirt that the model is wearing, kind of thing. You'll have time to test those things in the future, but I think people get too caught up in those types of practices that big brands are spending a lot of time and money on, and forget about the fundamentals themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. You brought up some really great points. I'd like to go back to like two of them that you mentioned. I think the first one, short of getting too granular or getting too in the weeds, but you brought up something that I thought was really important to discuss further about like the worry or the concern that marketers have that people are going to outbid us for those keywords, for example. Uh, Talk us through, if you can, even from a top level perspective, how does a small B2B company navigate through that? Because it sounds like it can be an exercise that could potentially become very complex.
And the nice thing about this is it's all automated these days. So,
Mhm.
realistically, when you are putting, saying, hey, I want to run an ad, whether it be on Google or on Meta, what's happening is a real time auction where they're saying, hey, there's this particular placement or this particular search in the case of Google. So, anybody who could possibly run an ad on that, we're going to let them, put their ad forth and how much they're willing to bid on it, and see, who kind of gets in the top position and gets to show their ad. Now, the thing that's interesting there is it's not based only on how much you're about to pay for the ad. It's also based on the quality of the ad or how good of a match the ad is for that particular person or that particular search that's coming in. And that's where your ad can be more targeted, can be a higher quality ad because it's more specific. So you actually are going to be paying a little bit less for that placement than even some of these really big brands that are necessarily speaking a little bit broader language and not as niche down of a message. So that's one big way. The other big thing is, as I mentioned, it's in real time on every single potential ad placement or every potential search. So what that means is you probably aren't going to compete with the big guys across all of the searches they're running, but you don't have to because you may only show up. You may only overlap in 5% of the placement. So where their budgets are going out there to every single potential placement or search that they could show up for, you only need to compete with them in that small percentage that is most relevant to your specific audience.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. Okay, second follow up question, and again, I'm gonna be careful because we could potentially go down a deep rabbit hole with this one. But one thing that we all know about PPC is that there's a lot behind it, and what I mean by that is it shouldn't be viewed as this one and done exercise. There's a bit of an ecosystem behind it. And what I mean by that is if somebody goes and sees the ad on Google or Meta and clicks on it, well, that click's got to redirect people somewhere, right? Be that a landing page or a website or whatnot. What's on the what kind of content are we talking about? What kind of CTA are we talking about? Walk us through that about why is it so important for B2B marketers to understand that PPC is a component in this ecosystem.
That's so important, and it's important, especially as we talk about smaller brands, smaller budgets. In that $10,000 to $20,000 ad spend range, what we find is that, first of all, as you mentioned, it's a holistic ecosystem. So yeah, the ads are one part, and you got to make sure that you've got your ad copy, you've got your placements, you've got your your strategy in the ad platforms down. But as you mentioned, if you're sending people to a landing page that's not built to convert, if it doesn't have the social proof that gives somebody the trust in your product or your service, they're not, you may be able to get folks to your site, but they're not ultimately going to purchase for you. And that's just one other component. Something else we see all the time is email flows. So making sure that you have automated welcome flows that if they don't purchase the first time they're on your site, they have a lower value touch point, whether it be downloading a free lead magnet or something like that, that brings them into your ecosystem and allows you to start nurturing the relationship over time. Those are two things that we see all the time: landing pages and email flows that are fundamentals that get overlooked. And people say, hey, the ads aren't working. I got to try more creative. I got to keep tweaking. I got to change the different structure that some YouTube guru told me that I need to be running. When in reality, it's like, no, there's some key fundamentals that you've got to get right about your business first, and getting those things right is going to have 100 times more impact than tweaking little bits of the creative here and there.
You brought up one word that I think is worth repeating. It's nurturing, right? And I think that gets ignored or overlooked a lot in B2B, especially when the organization's very sales driven. So it's all about volume, right? We gotta just to use the old adage of gotta hit that phone, right? Or pound the pavement and just get those numbers up, right? But at the end of the day, especially if we're talking about B2B, not everybody is ready to buy at the first contact. In fact, I would almost go as far as to say 97%, 98% of the time they're not in buying mode, right? They're probably still in an investigative mode. They're still looking at what the options are out there. They're probably doing their own research. That's how they landed on those ads. So it's, to your point, it's so important to nurture that that lead rather in a non-pushy, non-intrusive way that helps to build that trust, to give them that confidence that this is in fact the right company that we should be perhaps having a conversation with, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think sometimes people spend so much time on their messaging and their differentiators, and then they forget to tell their customers that, they spent all this time working through what exactly it is that made their business better than the competitor. But if you don't take the time to, set up a welcome email flow, or build an organic presence on Google, on Instagram or Facebook, you're not necessarily getting that message out and giving people a chance to get to know you and fall in love with your brand. So I think that's so important and often overlooked.
Absolutely. You brought up some of these already, but talk to us about some of these key pitfalls that marketing teams should be avoiding when it comes to PPC, and what should they be doing instead?
So we talked about a few of them, some of the fundamentals that exist outside of the ad ecosystem. But one pitfall that I really want to focus on that is really closely tied to the ad ecosystem is measurement. So making sure that once somebody hit your site, you understand where they came from and ultimately what they did. So that might be filling out a lead form, that might be purchasing a product if you're in kind of the e-commerce space, might be adding a product to their cart. You've got to make sure that you're measuring all those independent events for two purposes. One, passing that data back to a Google or a Meta is the only way that those platforms can optimize and continue to get you better and better results. And two, you need to have that data to be able to report on and understand where your ad dollars are going and whether they're working or not. That's how you make the decision of, should I be putting more budget into Google or into Meta, or hey, are neither of them working and I got to try something totally different? That's often overlooked. We see clients coming to us that have spent untold amounts of money, and they're not really even sure how it worked because they weren't measuring it in the first place, or they're just basing it on getting the cheapest clicks possible and not focusing on really optimizing for conversion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are some very important points. Um, in our last conversation, you talked about these 5 essentials that B2B brands need to have before they run their first ad campaign. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I'll kind of walk through and I don't know if we'll end up on 4 or 6, but we'll shoot for 5 here. The number one thing as you're going through or selling online, obviously you need to have an understanding of who your audience is, and who you're going to be targeting. From that and what comes out of that is having an understanding of what are the main pain points that they have and making sure that you're speaking to those on a really well designed website that's designed for, I say designed for conversion, but what I mean by that is it helps guide somebody through that buyer's journey, taking them from the point of just getting to know your brand to understanding what you do, to understanding how you solve their pain points, and then some social proof about why you're better than others. So, a understanding your audience, having a well developed website that speaks to the audience and importantly speaks to the real symptoms and pain points that they're dealing with and how you can help solve them. Number 3, I would say, is measurement. That's a big piece that we just talked about in depth, but making sure you're understanding once somebody hits the site, what are they doing, where are they going, what pages are they viewing, do they ultimately fill out a lead form, do they ultimately add the product to their cart and then leave. You've got to be able to measure what's happening once they hit the site. Beyond that, I would say maybe item number 4 will group together a lot of those other fundamentals. So things that even outside of the website, things like a nurture flow in email, a presence on social, these are all so important. And even if you're focused on paid ads, running to a website to get a conversion, all of these other things are going to help that process. It's a holistic marketing process, because we know today that people see you across a number of channels. It's not that they're only going to see your ad, come to your website, make a decision and buy. They're going to, hopefully see your ad later on, maybe see an organic post that you made on your socials. Maybe they bump into you at a trade show or a conference, and ultimately get to your website, make the decision there. So making sure that those other fundamentals like an email nurture flow or a good organic social present are available. And then number 5, and I think this is most important and what I see people get wrong all the time, is understand your goals. So people will say, hey, I need to run ads. I want to run ads because I want more leads. Ultimately, obviously we can run ads and that could be an outcome. But if you're not able to say, what type of leads do you want? Why are you not getting enough leads today? What's your capacity? How many leads can you handle? What type of behaviors are you trying to get more of, whether it be leads versus sales versus people buying a purchase or even downloading a lead magnet so that we can begin the nurture process. These are all viable directions to go. And if you're not thinking through specifically for your business, what's the very specific goal that you have, and more importantly, what are the constraints you have? What's your budget? How much creative do you have available? Do you have a team on staff that can create more creative or work with your marketing strategy? Understanding the goals and the constraints. A lot of people get caught up and just say, hey, I got to run some ads and go for it. I want more revenue. When in reality, there's all these different nuances to it, and you really need to know what your specific goal is.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. So let me just quickly recap for the benefit of the listeners, right? So you were talking about understand who the audience is, which is imperative. I mean, you almost shouldn't start anything without knowing that, right? The second one was a well-developed website, and I've got a follow-up question for you on that one. Third one is measurement, so metrics, like know what to measure, and we will have a separate question about metrics later on in the conversation. 4 is nurture flow in email and organic and a presence on social. And the last one is understanding your goals, right? Like what is it you want to achieve with this, right? So on the topic of websites, when you say well-developed website, I have this feeling that you're not referring to it's got to be this incredibly expensive and complex website. That's not what you're talking about, right?
No, and oftentimes the simpler it is, the better it's going to convert. So I think that's really important. What we think about, and I think the way I think of it is, in the old days, you might have a salesperson who's going to get in front of a potential lead and then help kind of work through the objections they might have. So hey, I'm not sure, this might be a little too expensive for me, or hey, I'm not sure if you really serve people in my niche, or if you work with somebody different. I don't know that this is a great fit for me. And the
Hmm.
salesperson would have all the answers, right? They would say, hey,
Right.
if this is their objection, this is how we answer that. If this is their
Yes.
objection, this is how we answer that. This is how we tell them about how we solve their problems.
Hmm.
In today's day and age, you may still have some salespeople, but your website needs to do a lot of that work itself. So that's what we need to think through: is what are all the things that a buyer needs to know before they're ready to make that purchase, and make sure that we're putting that in front of them in a way that's super easy to understand. A confused buyer is not a buyer.
Yeah.
Is a better way to use that statement. I'm sure you've probably heard that.
Yes. Yes. I have.
Somebody, if they find confusion, they're not going to be ultimately making a purchase with you. So making sure it's really, really clear: what is your product or service? How does it solve the customer's problem? And hopefully some social proof too, making sure that there's some confidence that you've solved this problem for other people like the potential buyer.
And when you say social proof, you're of course referring to things like in the form of case studies, testimonials, maybe even reviews on like platforms like Clutch and the like.
Exactly. All of those are great. If you have a partner badge that, hey, you've done good work, or you're certified to do particular work, that could be another one. If you've been featured in particular publications, that can be another one. But yeah, ultimately, all of these different ways that help give confidence that you can do the job.
Fantastic, fantastic. You kind of scratched the surface a little bit in the beginning of the conversation, but PPC and AI, right? I mean, you kind of cannot avoid this topic, right? Because it permeates across the entire marketing spectrum. But from your perspective and in your experience, to what degree do you find AI harmful and helpful when it comes to PPC?
So I would say on kind of the helpful side, and this is something that's what's interesting is we think of AI, in the last, say, 3 years since ChatGPT released. Was it 3.5 was the first, kind of big milestone breaking model where people said, oh my gosh, this can really do a lot of, can sound like a real human kind of thing. But long before that, AI has been implemented in these platforms in Google and Meta. And for probably the last 10 years, we've been moving in the direction of more automation, more AI. So earlier we talked about that ad auction where every single time a keyword is searched or a placement pops up on Facebook or Instagram, you have to have a particular bid of how much you're willing to spend to get your ad there. These days, you're not putting any of those bids in manually. You're just telling Meta or Google, hey, here's the budget I want, and here's the data coming from my website to let people know if they're purchasing or filling out a lead form or not. And now Google or Meta, go out there and run with it. Go ahead and optimize with the ad assets that I've given you, and the budget that I've given you. Go ahead and put me wherever you need to put me in order to get the most possible results, goals, that you can. And that's all AI driven, and it's been that way for a long time. We've been moving in that kind of direction. So that's on the helpful side. That's where AI is really driving success for us. Uh, on the hurtful side, you hear a lot of times people talking about, now especially in Google, when somebody makes a search, they're getting the information, they're getting an answer right up front, or maybe they're not even going to Google, maybe they're in ChatGPT or Perplexity. So
It's a summary at the top, right? Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So they
Yeah.
don't even need to come to your website. From a PPC perspective, there's not that click that you can go ahead and bid on and put your ad in front of, and that can be a concern. Honestly, from a services and product perspective, I find that to be a little bit less of an issue. It's definitely more of an issue for publishers. So if you have an information content kind of business, that's really harmful for you right now, because people are getting that information without ever having to make the click onto your website. But ultimately, if somebody's going to want to, you know, hire you for your services or buy one of your products, they still have to click through at some point. They're not necessarily making that purchase, or they're definitely not making that purchase out of the Google results summary. Um, that being said, the other kind of big thing, and why I'm not super, super concerned about that development, is that whether it be on ChatGPT or on Google, they really haven't started monetizing yet. And that's where I think you're still going to see ads up in that area. We know that you're going to be seeing ads up there. In fact, ChatGPT is already hiring up and staffing up an ad organization. So it's just going to be one more platform, one more area where you can run ads and get in front of your ideal customers. Because ultimately, a subscription model can work to a degree, but these companies from an economic basis need to have ads in order to kind of fund the type of growth that they need to see over the coming years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Previously, like when we talked about this, you mentioned this one thing, right? It kind of sounds like a song, right? Like this one metric that every B2B brand must know before scaling. So what is it and why do you think B2B brands should have it?
So I'll maybe take a little bit of a cop out, and there are a couple different metrics. We, especially on the e-commerce side, we look at four key metrics. One of the people get caught up when they're thinking about in the PPC world. A lot of times people talk about ROAS or CPA. So ROAS would be the amount of revenue that you're getting in for every ad dollar you spend, return on ad spend, and CPA would be cost per action, or essentially, if somebody is looking to get lead forms filled out, how many dollars of ad spend are you putting in for every lead form that you're getting filled out? And those can be important metrics, but they abstract away a lot of important nuance. And it's very possible to look good in those metrics and still not make a ton of money. So we have these four key metrics, especially on the e-commerce side that we focus in on. And it's things like first order profitability. So yeah, your ROAS may be high, but if it's a lot of people making repeat purchases, you may still be spending too much money to acquire that first customer. So first order profitability is going to be the first time somebody makes a purchase. Are you profitable or are you not? That one individual purchase, even before you start to look at customer lifetime growth, is it profitable for you? Another key metric that we look at is that customer lifetime growth. So, okay, perfect. You've profitably gotten that first purchase, but are you building enough customer lifetime value so that over time it's going to pay off what you had to put in to acquire that customer in the first place? And another key one that really applies, whether it be e-commerce or elsewhere, is the percentage of your revenue, the percentage of your leads that are coming from organic channels versus paid channels. So we love to focus on the paid side. We help people find scalable, profitable results in the paid channels. But if you're too over indexed in those, if you're getting too much of your revenue or your leads from paid channels, that tells you that you're probably paying a little bit too much for it. And you need to develop that organic, from your social, from people just finding you via regular old Google search, making sure that you're not over indexed towards the paid channel if you want to be able to scale that profitably.
Okay. No, those are some really great points. And I'm glad that you pointed that out about how everybody is very obsessed with ROAS and CPA, but there are actually, in fact, other metrics that they really should be paying more attention to or that deserve some of that limelight as well. Right?
Exactly.
Fantastic. So we get to the point in the conversation, my friend, where we're talking about actionable tips, and you've given us a ton already within these past 30 minutes. But just imagine there's a B2B marketer out there that's listening to this conversation between you and I, and there are 3 to 5 things that you can tell them, you can take action on this right now, right after listening to this conversation. What would those things be?
Yeah. So first and foremost, we talked about your measurement. The action there is use GA4, Google Analytics. If you don't have Google Analytics installed on your website already, make sure you go ahead and get that installed. It's a free tool. There's some other paid tools that are better in certain ways, but for my money, as you're getting started out, Google Analytics is absolutely table stakes. You've got to have that installed on your site and set up properly to measure the behavior of what's happening on your site. If we're talking PPC, similar to that is making sure that everything is technically configured correctly so that when somebody executes a behavior, makes a purchase, fills out a lead form, that data is getting back to either Google or Meta. So those are kind of some of the key things that you got to do right out the gate. And GA4, Google Analytics. It's a free tool, so there's really no excuse not to have that set up. The other thing that I think is a first step that a lot of folks really gotta figure out is getting crystal clear on who your customer is, what their main pain point that you can solve is, and then ultimately what's your goal for ads. So those kind of three components all tied together. A lot of times, we find people that are either, hey, we're just looking for leads, but they can't really give a good answer on who their customer is or what type of leads would be a good lead for them, or maybe they're really tight on who their customer is, and they say, hey, we just got to run some ads, but understanding kind of where ads fit into the overall ecosystem. How are you doing organically? How do you close leads once you get them? How often do people who make that first purchase end up coming back and making an additional purchase? Make sure you understand what you're actually trying to get out of the ads. I think that's probably the number one thing, and you can't do that without the measurement piece that we discussed earlier. But I would really, kind of start from a measurement component, make sure you understand what's happening when folks hit your site. And then before you spend $1 in paid ads, make sure you understand what you're trying to get out of those paid ads and what gap in your marketing you're trying to solve.
Absolutely. And it's such a dangerous mindset to have that, we just want to quickly do this, right? And we just want to generate some quick leads so we can show some numbers. But if you, to your point, and you've raised it a couple of times in this conversation, if you don't do this heavy lifting up front with understanding who your target audience is and understanding what the actual goals of this exercise are, then all of this is going to go down the drain at some point, right? I mean, I don't have to tell you this is your area of expertise, but if you don't know what you're doing with paid ads, that budget's going to evaporate fairly quickly.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're going to move on to the soapbox question. I'm going to say I was trying to think about how to describe this, but yeah, that's the best description. What is a status quo in your area of expertise that you passionately disagree with, and why?
That's a great question. I think we talked about some of the individual components earlier. Folks kind of listening to gurus, kind of coming. We still to this day, have clients or prospective clients coming in and say, "Hey, I saw this YouTube video that told me I've got to do this," and it's just bad advice for them, kind of thing. Where they didn't really, get that good advice and take it one step further to see how that fits for their specific business. I think that happens all too often. The other big thing that we see, especially in marketing in general, I think there's a lot of suspicion of marketing. We people are really looking for authenticity these days, and I think there's a fear that marketing as an industry is all about telling lies or not giving an authentic answer, trying to trick somebody into buying a product or a service. And a lot of that, it's kind of our own fault, honestly. There's a lot of gurus out there that give the industry a bad name, when in reality, all of this is about, you should have a valuable product or a valuable service. And what we're doing, whether it be via paid ads or organic or, those email nurture flows, is just educating the customer on how your product authentically solves their specific pain points. So I think that's, something I would really, like to kind of dispel that myth that marketing agencies say are not able to, or are all charlatans and not able to give you good authentic support. We like to kind of think of it almost like when you bring your car to a mechanic, that old trusted mechanic thing, right? You don't know what's going on under the hood. You don't know what that clunking sound is. So you better find a mechanic that you can trust to shoot it to you straight, not sell you something you don't need. We like to think of ourselves like that in the marketing world, in a world where there's a lot of suspicion of the practitioners, making sure that you can find somebody who is transparent and that you can trust to tell you the truth. I think that's, there's a lot of, good people out there and a lot of good businesses, agencies out there. I'd like to kind of, dispel that myth that there isn't, a trustworthy marketing agency that can really help you guide your business to success and help you find the right answers for you, not what's just profitable for the agency.
Andy, this is going to sound so biased coming from me, but yes, I agree with you. There are some good marketers out there, right? I mean, we have to believe that too, because not all of us are out there to like just make some quick profit. In fact, like the way that I work with my clients is I always say upfront honesty and transparency.
Exactly.
And every time they ask me for advice and or what I would do in this situation, I always start the answer by saying full transparency. Right? This is how I would do it. Or I wouldn't recommend you do this right now because it's not a good use of your budget, for example, right? And we know that there are agencies out there that wouldn't do that, right? They won't say that, right? They'll just say, oh yeah, absolutely, go and do it, right? But, okay, but those relationships don't tend to last very long, in my experience. Okay, so here comes the bonus question, and we talked a little bit about this before I hit record, but rumor has it that you started your agency 3 months before your first child was born. So the question is, what important lesson did that experience teach you, both personally and professionally? Like it was almost like there were two things coming into this world at that point in time, as it were, right?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly there's been a lot that that I've learned from both the business and the parenting journeys. I think kind of the crossover there. We think about like the time component, right? There's only so many hours in the day. One big thing is it definitely gives you perspective. We always think about the perspective. Hey, family matters the most, and kind of what it means to now I know what's really important, as opposed to getting worried or bent out of shape about some of the little things. But I think that really applies to the whole the holistic person, and the whole lifestyle, whether it be how we spend time with family, or how we spend time working on the business and growing the business. It really forces you, because you have a limited time horizon, you know forces you to kind of really focus in on what's most important, and not waste your time on either spending time on the things that aren't going to be impactful or don't matter so much, and especially not wasting your worry and your anxiety on things that are going to solve themselves, and you really don't need to be worried about.
And just my 2 cents worth, because we kind of both started our businesses around the same time, but it it kind of teaches you to prioritize, and manage your time a little bit better. Not that we didn't know how to manage our time previously, but it's a different type of time management, right? Like time management to take care of the family, and time management to like run the business, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. No, fantastic. Andy, this has been such a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for coming on and for sharing your experience and expertise with the listeners. Please, a quick intro to yourself and how folks out there can get in touch with you.
Yeah, so we're at ppcpitbulls.com. At PPC Pitbulls, we're really focused on helping e-commerce directors, marketing directors, and just small businesses in general figure out, kind of demystify the world of digital marketing, and go from confused, not knowing where the next dollars are going to come in, to having a really good, stable strategy, and confidence in a strategy for profitable growth. So if you want to learn more, come check us out. We'll actually have a special page, ppcpitbulls.com/mission. And that will be for listeners of this particular podcast. I talked about those 4 key metrics that we really care about. We've got that all put down in kind of a self guide that you can go through. We call it our paid ads reality checklist. You can go through step by step. It'll show you exactly how to calculate each one of those metrics and how to analyze it on the back end. If that's too much for you, you can always just book a time with me too. I love sitting down with and meeting new small businesses, learning about your niche, and talking about where you can go next with your digital marketing.
Fantastic. So once again, Andy, thanks so much for coming on. Take care, stay safe, and talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thanks for having me.